Chapter 30. Mr. Yao was at the motel when I got home. Hank had stopped paying his rent, but he wasn't moving out. He had done some research and discovered a law in California that said that if someone lived somewhere continuously for more than 30 days, that made them a tenant. That gave them certain rights, including the right not to be kicked out all of a sudden, even if they stopped paying rent. "Now you listen to me, Hank. You pay up right this minute." Mr. Yao pounded on Hank's door. I immediately threw the blue baseball cap onto the front desk, hid my tip jar in my room, and went out the back to join my parents. They were standing awkwardly next to Mr. Yao in front of Hank's. Mr. Yao had apparently insisted they come with him. He said it was training purposes. Hank opened the door. "Pay up or get out," Mr. Yao said, jabbing his finger at Hank. "It's as simple as that." "Check your facts, Yao," Hank said. "I've been staying here for 6 months. That makes me a resident. You can't just kick out a resident like that," he finished with a snap of his fingers. Mr. Yao shook his head. "That can't be right. You've been here for 6 months?" He turned to my parents. "It's true," my parents said. "How did we ever let this street rat weasel his way in here?" Mr. Yao fumed. "Well, this has been lovely," Hank said, closing the door in Mr. Yao's face. Mr. Yao pounded on the door, shouting, "You're a loser, and this isn't over." When Hank refused to open up, Mr. Yao turned to my parents. "You two, in my office, now." My parents exchanged worried looks as they followed him back to the front office. For the next 15 minutes, I listened to Mr. Yao yammer on and on at my parents from my room. He said that if Hank did not pay up, we would have to pay for Hank. He was going to take the rent straight out of our salary. Anger brewed inside me, scolding hot. Chapter 31. At school, Jason continued making fun of my clothes. Even the 6th graders were in on it now. At first, I managed to convince myself that it was kind of flattering, that they were even talking about me, but then I heard what they said. In the bathroom, a couple of 6th grade girls were gossiping. "Her pants. Oh my gosh, have you seen her pants?" they asked each other while I sat in the stall. "It's like she buys her clothes by the pound. My grandmother dresses better than her." I sat on the toilet waiting for them to leave, my heart clenching like a fist. "Dear mean girls, you're right. I buy my clothes by the pound. My mom and I go over to the Goodwill and we buy second-hand clothes. Clothes you probably threw away. I'm probably wearing your socks right now. Let me tell you what it's like to buy second-hand clothes. First, my mom washes it a million times. She scrubs it with her hands, and then she puts it in the washer and then scrubs it again. Still, when I first put it on, I wriggle and squirm, thinking of all the girls who've been inside these pants before. I used to hope it was girls like you, girls who lived in big houses, girls who go on vacation in the summer. I used to think that maybe if I was wearing the same pants, I kind of went on vacation too, and that used to make me happy. Now, do you know what I think? I think I'd rather go on vacation than be like you. I think I'd rather never go on vacation than be like you. Mia Tang. P.S. Flora cotton pants are way more comfy than jeans." She wrote them that little letter. It was so satisfying writing the letter that, for a full second, I actually thought about putting it into my backpack and giving it to the girls at school. But I didn't. School dragged on. The popular girls continued mocking me. Mr. Yao called up twice a day to scream at us. The only thing that made me feel a tiny bit better was that somebody left $5 in the tip jar after their stay. One afternoon while I was sitting at the front desk, a beat-up old Chevrolet slowed by the motel. It inched toward us, the driver craning his neck as he peered in. I squinted inside the car and saw a Chinese man. I figured he must be a friend of Aunt Ling's, looking for the blue baseball cap, so I immediately waved at him to come in. Mr. Yao wasn't here. The coast was clear. Uncle Zhu was a big man, about 6'2". 200 pounds of northern Chinese, he said proudly, in his thick, Arbin accent. My dad pointed at his compact car. "And you've been sleeping in that thing?" Uncle Zhu had explained that he hadn't had a place to sleep for a while. It's been a hard couple of weeks, he said, stretching as he said the words. Well, let's get you a proper shower and a meal, my dad said, leaning him toward room 3. At dinner, he told us he had been working as a janitor in hospice. What's a hospice? I asked. He thought for a minute about how to put it. It's basically a waiting room. You mean like an airport? I asked. The day I left China, Shen had pointed to the waiting room in the arrival section right before I got on the plane. I'll see you right there in a couple of years, okay, he said. I nodded. Tears stung the back of my eyes. The time will flash like womb, he said. Then he looked down at the floor and whispered, and when you come back, you'll be all American. No, I won't, I insisted. Will too, he said. Nothing's going to change, Shen. Yes, it will, he said. You're going to come back wearing all kinds of fancy clothes. Oh, Shen, if only you knew. I looked up from my floral pants to Uncle Zhu. So, is that what it is? A waiting room for arrivals? I asked. He glanced at my parents as if to get their permission. They nodded at him, waiting. It's a waiting room for people who are about to pass away, he finally said. Oh. Ever so quietly, my mother picked up the last of the beef with her chopsticks and set it down onto his plate. Uncle set off for San Diego the next morning. When I heard San Diego, I dashed to the front office and jotted down another one of the addresses. Uncle Zhu promised he'd drive by and call me if he saw the Thunderbird. As my dad and I waved, suddenly I had an idea. I turned to my dad. What if we hide Hank, like the immigrants? I asked him. Then Mr. Yao would stop screaming at us. He would never know. My dad shook his head and said that it was too risky. The immigrants only stayed for one night, whereas Hank lived here. We were bound to get caught. I decided to drop it. A week later, my parents received their check from Mr. Yao. $140 was missing. True to his word, Mr. Yao was making us pay for Hank. $20 a day. My parents got into a big fight about what to do. My mother said we should quit, but my dad wouldn't hear of it. Quit? My dad said, and do what? You think it's any better out there? You heard the stories from all the immigrants. My mother didn't respond, but instead went into the kitchen and pulled out stinky tofu paste from the back of the cupboard. Stinky tofu paste was this disgusting concoction you could buy at the Chinese supermarket, which she ate whenever she'd been through a lot. And even though I didn't like the smell of tofu, I still liked it more than hearing my parents fighting. As my mom munched away on her paste, my dad sat out by the curb and waiting for the smell to clear. The early evening wind sighed between us. I wanted to tell him it was going to be okay, that I had a plan to save us. All I needed was $300, and I even had a plan for that, too. So far, I had made $30 in tips, but I didn't end up telling him. I was worried if he knew about the $30, he might take it away. And then I wouldn't be able to save us. Chapter 32.